First thing that comes to your head that you would want to tell someone that would be struggling with the same thing you are?
I would just say, never give up.
We had 3 healthy children, and I remember saying to Mike, God, how are we so lucky? There's so much pain in this earth. And I remember him knocking on wood and just saying, I don't know, don't even say that, because you see so many people go through difficult situations and through pain, and you think it'll never happen to you. And then you get the call. Mitchell, God, how do I describe Mitchell? He was a handful. He was full of life. He made everyone laugh and smile. He made everyone feel like they were his best friend. When I think about getting that call, the first thing I think of is being grateful that my husband was here. I wasn't even gonna take the call because we were sitting and having lunch together, and I saw it was from the dermatologist, and I wasn't even nervous. I just thought, oh, we're gonna get news that he's fine. My first reaction when I answered the phone and the nurse let us know that Mitchell was positive for melanoma, it literally took my breath away. She said that word, and I just, you think death, when you hear cancer. And I just thought, that's not possible. How do we tell Mitchell that he has a disease that could actually be incurable? So they were sending us to U of M and to get a margin cut and meet a surgeon there. We're brought into a room, and you could look at the doctor's face and pretty much determine what he was about to tell you. We were told several times there was no cure, there is no cure. It was not just in his lymph system, it ended up getting in his bone, in his spine, in his brain, in his liver. He lost 30 pounds, and he was definitely sick. He had tons of people come visit, which was great. The support was great, but it was really, really hard to see him decline so quickly. And so then we went to St. Jude, and we were there for several months. That was difficult because our family had to split up. Mike was here with the 2 girls. Mitch was losing hearing. He was losing ability to eat and keep food down. His whole mouth went numb, and he was not able to swallow. We didn't know at that time if Mitch would ever come home again. There was one drug that we had prayed for several months. He wasn't old enough to take it, but we fought hard, and Dr. Papo said, I'm sorry, he probably won't turn 16. This was in June. And he said he probably won't ever turn 16 and be able to try this drug. He's not getting out of bed. He's not able to keep food down. And I remember jumping up on Mitchell's bed and telling him, we can get the drug we've been praying for, but you have to get stronger. And it was then that Mitch looked at me and he said, we're gonna get the drug. I remember asking Mitchell, do you have any idea how many people are praying for you right now? And he was like, I don't know, maybe like 50. And I said, Mitch, and we would look at our Caring Bridge site, and we would look at Facebook, and I'd show him text messages, and he was like, wow, they're literally like thousands. And I felt like God's gonna do this. Mitch is gonna have, a story to tell. He did try that drug, and he not only turned 16, he lived to go to Warner Camp. He counseled his sister's camp. He was in a wheelchair, and he was one of the counselor's helpers. He got his hearing back. He got up on water skis. He got up on water skis 3 times. And because he said, you know, anything he put his mind to, he would make it happen. So he did so much, and he fought, and he never gave up. He taught us to never give up. I was excited. I thought, he is home and we're gonna fight this. And every day we would read scripture. Mitchell would recite scripture claiming victory over his disease every day. As we got closer and Mitch was getting sicker and needing more pain meds, we had people here praying over him pretty much nonstop. And I remember just crying and not wanting Mitch to see me cry. So trying to be there for him, but going to the bathroom and just, you know, cry. And I was really scared. And I remember feeling like, how could I possibly get through losing him? I remember touching my knees and feeling scabs from being on my knees praying over him. I didn't want the scabs to go away. I just wanted them to stay there forever, because it meant I'd rather be praying for him sick than not having him here at all. The morning Mitchell passed away, I put my hands on his liver that was getting larger, and I prayed for that sickness to just leave his body. And he put his hand on mine and kind of grabbed it and gave me this look that said, stop. And he had never, ever asked me to stop praying for healing, because that's all we'd known for 3 years, is praying over him and believing and claiming and believing. And he looked at me and he said, and then he turned his head, and I know he was seeing glory. I know God was gifting him with a peace that telling me, Mom, I'm okay, you can stop praying for me. Even though Mitchell was not healed, he is so a part of everything that we do. He's a part of every day. We talk about him all the time in this family. My daughters, they're stronger than they ever thought they could be because of Mitchell. They saw him sick climb up to the top of a dune, and they saw him never give up. They saw him never stop believing in being cured, never complain, never say, why me? And you can't not be affected by that. I had the privilege of caring for the strongest child ever. It was such an honor to take care of him and see him grow from a crazy, wild, fun 13-year-old boy to a man, a young man of strength and faith. And he taught myself and our family and so many people how to never give up and to never stop believing. Not a day goes by I don't miss him terribly. Not a day, not an hour. It was a journey that I would not change. I'd love to change the outcome, but I wouldn't change any minute we spent together in that journey.
What good are you seeing in the midst of all this really hard trial?
Just how other people can see everybody that knows my story just grow in faith. And I don't know, there's just so many people that are really affected by it and have grown in their spiritual path.
Can we just give it up for the story of unstoppable faith? Incredible young man, an incredible story about unstoppable faith. And, you know, really every single one of us live our lives with one of two choices to make of how we're going to live. We're either going to live with faith or we're going to be paralyzed by fear. And that applies to just about every area of our life. It doesn't matter who you are. It's really a battle of faith. And Mitchell lived with incredible, courageous, and as he liked to say, unstoppable faith. When I was thinking about Mitchell's life and Mitchell's story, it took me all the way back to some information that I read about an animal, a creature that lives in Africa called the African impala. The African impala is kind of like an antelope. It's a small deer type of creature that lives in the Serengeti Desert, and it's a remarkable, gracious, powerful animal. The impala can leap from a standing position 10 foot high, and it can jump from point A to point B and cover over 30 foot of distance. So imagine, it can run at speeds of over 25 miles an hour. Jump 10 foot high, leap 30 foot. It's almost impossible to capture it. But if you capture it, the ironic thing about it is that you can keep it within an enclosure with walls that are only 2 to 2.5 foot high. As long as those enclosures are solid so that you can't see through them, because an impala will not jump over anything that it is not certain what it's going to land on the other side of it. In other words, the impala will not leap, it will not jump if it's not sure where its feet are going to land. And so because of that, you can keep an impala that has the ability to jump 10 foot high, 30 foot, run at 25, 30 miles an hour, but it will stay within the confines of its captivity just simply because it does not know where its feet are going to land if it takes a jump. And I was thinking about Mitchell, that Mitchell has a lot in common with an impala because he was fast like an impala when he ran cross country. And he could jump, he had ups in basketball. He was fearless when it came to taking a jump shot. But he was different from an impala because although the impala will not jump when he doesn't know where his feet are going to land, Mitchell took the leap of faith and trusted God, even when he wasn't sure where his feet were going to land, and he did it courageously. Do you know the walk of faith is the walk that God calls every single one of us as believers to live our lives by? 2 Corinthians 5:7 says, we walk by faith and not by sight. Hebrews chapter 11, verse 1 says that faith is the substance of things hoped for, and it's the evidence of things not seen. So we walk by faith and not by sight. The impala walks by sight and not by faith. What is unstoppable faith? Unstoppable faith is believing and trusting even when what we see or what we cannot see is before us. This is how we're supposed to live our lives. And you know, every single one of us are going to find ourselves at different points of our life with walls before us, giants before us, obstacles before us, whether they're 2 foot tall, 2.5 foot tall, or whether it happens to be a medical report, whether it happens to be a financial difficulty, whether it happens to be something internal on the inside of us that's broken and we can't seem to get over, a battle on the inside. All of us are going to come up to our enclosures, the points of captivity in our life, and we're going to respond in one of two ways. We're either going to respond by faith or we're going to respond by sight. We're going to see what we see, and we're going to believe that there's no way that we can step over it because we're not sure what is going to happen on the other side. That's fear. Or we're going to respond, and we're going to believe, and we're going to trust, and we're going to take the leap of faith called faith. See, when we put our faith and we put our trust in God, that's not passive. It's not weak. And, you know, sometimes in our culture and sometimes in our society, when we talk about faith, people of faith, quote, people of faith, are looked at as weak, needing a crutch, passive people. But let me tell you this morning that there is nothing more radical than living your life in absolute total faith and trusting God. Because what faith is putting your trust and your faith in the one that you've never seen, in spite of all the things around you that you've always seen. And that's radical. To put your faith and trust in the character, in the promises of a God that you have never seen. That's what it means that faith is the substance. It means when what you're believing for, what God has promised, is not visible, faith in the character of a good God becomes the actual substance that you hold on to. It becomes the evidence or the title deed of what you believe God will do and has promised to do, even when everything that is around you speaks to the contrary. How many know that life doesn't always go the way that you plan it? Can anybody relate to that? Has anybody in this room ever made plans for your life or plans for your day or plans for your week, and maybe even in some significant ways, and some things have gone differently than your 5-year plan that you wrote down on paper? You may have gone to college and thought, I'm going to get a degree in here, and then never got a degree. Or got a degree and then you ended up working in a different occupation. Sometimes it's more devastating. You know, it might be you got married and you decided you were going to stay married to this person for life, but now through circumstances, maybe because of yourself or somebody else, you find yourself in a position where those plans have changed. Dreams, relationships. Life doesn't always go the way that we planned it. In fact, it's ironic that in this series that we're doing both here on weekends and we're doing in our groups, that this series did not go the way that we planned it. You see, if you've paid attention and you looked at this lesson, you'll realize that Unstoppable Faith is actually lesson 3. It's actually week 3 in the study guide. But yeah, here we are in week number 2. You might think, well, how did that happen? Well, here's how it happened. We wrote this curriculum last spring. And then, because of our anniversary, later on, we bumped the start of this series to a week later, which meant that this lesson would be next weekend, in which I'm going to be out of town and wasn't going to be able to do this lesson. But this particular story is so near and dear to my heart because Jane and I have had the privilege and the honor of walking with Mitchell and his family through this journey that I just felt I had to do it. So I went to Pastor Tony and I threw the senior pastor trump card down. And I said, hey, I know that we planned for this to be week 3, but I need to do this, which means we're going to have to do it as week 2. And he said, well, what do we do with week 2? I said, it's strategery. We're going to make week 2 week 3. So it's not how we scripted it. It's not how we laid it out. And that's exactly how sometimes life goes, where we make our plans, but things don't go that way. And you know, Mitchell Roslin was a young man who life did not go the way that his parents had planned, that he would have planned. You don't expect when you're a teenager to contract cancer and to be in a fight for your life, but that's exactly what happens. But who we are and what we believe is most revealed in moments of crisis. And what came to the surface out of Mitchell and came to the surface out of his mom and his dad and his sisters and all of his family and friends was unstoppable faith. And as I said, I had the privilege of being a part of it. I'll never forget the morning I had gone to the Black Owl coffee shop to study, because everybody knows if you want to have good Jesus time, you have to have good coffee. Don't laugh at me, it's true, and you know that. And so sometimes I would go down to the coffee shop, put my earphones in and study. And this particular day I was just sitting there and I had not seen Brenda, well, I don't know, for months, maybe even longer. And it just so happened that particular day she had gotten a phone call from the doctors and got a bad report on Mitchell's health. Cancer was furiously attacking his body. And she was supposed to meet a friend in a coffee shop. And so she walked in through the doors, and as she came through the doors, I was facing the door. She saw me, and immediately she came right over to where I was, and I had an opportunity. She told me what had just happened. She was still kind of in shock. and had an opportunity there to pray with her, encourage her. And I told her about our prayer room here at church and said, if you need a place to go to just be quiet before the Lord, you can go there, and she did. And from that day forward, Jane and I began to walk along with this family. Incredible family. Got an opportunity to know Mitchell in a way that I probably would not have gotten to know him. And got to see firsthand a family that did not fall apart and did not crumble, like statistics tell us happen when something like this happens. But we got to see firsthand what happens when a young man puts his total faith in the God that he says he believes in a family that rallies around and instead of being pulled apart, is drawn together and lived radically. They lived radical faith. And Mitchell lived by faith the entire time. I watched him from beginning all the way into the last moments of his life, last days of his life. And I can tell you this, that young man had a faith that far surpassed his age. He went through battles that would have brought grown men to their knees. And he did it with a smile on his face and even a sense of humor. I'll never forget going in and seeing him one of the last times I had a conversation with Mitchell. And one of the ways that I know that Mitchell was a young man of great faith is he's a Michigan State Spartans fan. And this year we have to walk by faith. But I remember talking with him. He was at home. He was in his bed and not feeling well. He had lost a lot of weight and just tired, just becoming weary. But yet there was something still very much alive on the inside of him. And so for whatever reason, it just happened to be him and I and maybe one other person sitting there. I think Brenda and maybe Jane were talking off to the side or whatever. And I was just trying to make small talk with him and brought up sports and brought up the Spartans. And I made some comment to him about how, well, even Michigan looks good. I'm happy for Michigan. And he looked at me, he was quiet for a minute, and then he said, Pastor Lee, I'm not that sick. I thought, I love this kid. You see, when I think of Mitchell in the midst of his journey, even though his body was getting worse, what I know is that his faith was growing stronger. And sometimes God does things in our faith on the inside of us that are totally contrary to the circumstances that are happening all around us. I'm reminded of the words of the Apostle Paul in 2 Corinthians chapter 4, where he said, we do not lose heart. He said, though our outer self is wasting away, our inner man is being renewed day by day. For this light momentary affliction is preparing for us an eternal weight of glory beyond all comparison. And as we look not to the things that are seen, but to the things that are unseen. For the things that are seen are temporary, transit, subject to change. But the things that are unseen are eternal and permanent. That's exactly what I saw happen in this young man. His outer body was going through a battle for its very life. And in the middle of that, we saw God do miracles, sustain him, strengthen him. He goes to camp when they said that he shouldn't. And like you saw in the film, he got up on skis when he wasn't supposed to. Climbed up dunes when he wasn't supposed to. When they gave up hope, God did a miracle. When his hearing was gone, God restored things. There were miracles all throughout the battle. And there were hundreds of people that rallied around the family in prayer and support. In fact, people that flew from California to Michigan to pray. We saw so many miracles in the middle of that battle. But what I know is that no matter what was going on the outside of him, his body getting weak, bad reports from the doctor, what I know is on the inside, he was being renewed and strengthened day by day. His inner man, this young man was growing and maturing at an accelerated rate. He might have been just a teenager, but he was growing. He was putting on spiritual weight by the decades every week because the circumstances around him were negative, but he put his faith and his trust in the goodness of God. And let me tell you something. So many of us live our lives making the failed mistake that who we are on the inside is totally determined by the things that are going on around us. The word circumstance means around us. And those things, according to Paul, are subject to change. They're temporal. But we don't lose heart. Mitchell didn't lose heart, and faith never loses heart because our eyes are on something far greater than what is right now happening around us. Our eyes are on the weight of glory that even something like cancer, from an eternal perspective, is nothing more than a temporary affliction that we're going through that someday, from the perspective of eternity, will be minuscule in comparison to what God does in our heart through that battle and how he reveals his goodness through that battle. Mitchell didn't lose heart. He kept his eyes on the right things, and faith does not lose heart. An unstoppable faith is a win-win faith, because unstoppable faith, when we live by faith, even when it seems like we are losing, we're actually winning. Even when it seems like we're losing, that victory is gone, we're actually winning. Because circumstances change, but what God is doing on the inside of us is eternal and it's permanent and it cannot be taken away from us. You know, there's this scripture in the book of Hebrews. In fact, it's chapter 11. It's commonly referred to as the chapter of faith or the hall of faith. And in this chapter, the writer of Hebrews lists off all these people that we would call great heroes of the faith. Talks about Moses and talks about Noah, talks about Enoch. You know, Enoch was an old man. It says that he walked with the Lord and suddenly he was not. And the reason he was not is because when he was walking with God one day, God said to him, "We're closer to my place than to yours." And he just took Enoch home with him. Moses, who brought the children of Israel out of Egypt, and God did incredible miracles. Joshua, Gideon, Deborah, Barak, and Abraham, the founder of our faith, the father of our faith. None of us would be here today if it was not for a man named Abram, who, when God revealed himself to him, Abram said, "I believe in you." And he went on a journey, not even knowing where God was taking him, and he left everything familiar to go in pursuit of what God had promised. You want to talk about faith? That's incredible faith. But there's this scripture in verse number 13 that just grabs a hold of me when it comes to what we think of faith, because I think sometimes we have misconceptions about faith. It says in verse 13, these all, talking about all these people I just listed, including Abram, it says, these all died in faith, not having received the things promised, but having seen them, they greeted them from afar. And then it goes on to say, and having acknowledged that they were strangers and exiles on the earth. They were looking for a city whose founder and builder was God. You see, sometimes we think that faith only wins when we get the result that we wanted. It's like, well, I prayed for healing and God healed me. Well, do I believe that God is a healer? Absolutely. You couldn't convince me that God doesn't heal, that God is a good God, because I've seen God heal. So we don't even have to have the theological debate. But do I believe that when somebody doesn't get healed, it's because God's not good? No. And do I believe that someone has lost their battle because they didn't receive their healing? No. Because even when we appear to have lost, we actually win. Because here's what I know. Abram was a man of faith, a founder of faith, but do you know that God had given him a promise that he would inherit the land? But do you know that Abraham never possessed the land? It says that he died in faith having not received the promises. But we don't call Abraham a man of failed faith. We call him a man of extraordinary faith. For two things. Number one is he never lost his heart and he never failed to believe God. And number two, he left an incredible legacy, a promise that was passed down to Isaac and to Jacob and to you and I to this day. See, sometimes we inherit the promise here, and sometimes we inherit the promise there. Because this world is temporal. And the reason why Abraham and Moses and these other heroes of the faith could live and not lose their faith is because it says that they acknowledged that they were strangers and exiles on this earth. Guys, let me just tell you, this world is a test. We think it's so real. We think that this is all there is, and then heaven's just clouds and fluffy stuff up, and then we're going to play little harps and eat cream cheese with little cherub, wings like angels, and it's like that's going to be. This is the test run. And there's going to come a day in eternity when we look back on this life, and it will be a faint memory. But what we do on this planet, God is concerned about shaping and trying us and testing us and developing our faith and our relationship with Him so that we can reign in the next life. That's why Abraham was all right not inheriting the territory that God had promised, because he saw it, he believed God was good for it, and he was able to recognize that heaven was his real home and that he was leaving a legacy for those who would come after him. And let me tell you something. Mitchell left a legacy. At his funeral in this very room, we saw over 200 people receive Christ at his funeral, at an altar call that jammed every single one of these rows in the front of this church because of a young man who lived his life with unstoppable faith. And here we are this morning still talking about his story. Not because he was a perfect young man, but because he served a perfect God. You see, the reality is that unstoppable faith doesn't find its strength in the why, and it doesn't find its source in the how, but it finds its strength in a who. See, we all want the whys. Well, why didn't he get healed? I don't know the answer to that. I don't know the answer to that, but I don't change my theology to match my experience, because all I know is that God has said that He's good. All that I know is God has called us and challenged us to take the leap of faith, not knowing where our feet are going to land. But I don't need to have the why, because that's what we all want, right? Is we want the why. And let me tell you, greater minds than ours have sat around and almost drove themselves crazy trying to figure out the why. Why do bad things happen to good people? Why does cancer? Why is there war? Why are all these things? Listen, there will be a day when the why will be answered. Jesus will return, make everything that's wrong right. He'll get rid of sickness, disease. There will never be another case of cancer. There will never be another war. There will never be a day of separation, because He is Lord. But until that day, we do not lose heart. We don't need to know the why. And we all think that we want the how. We are all looking for a formula. Well, if you just do this, or if you just do that. But faith doesn't find its strength in a why or a how. It finds its strength in a who, in a good God. Listen to these words. Romans chapter 8, verse 37 says, "Knowing all these things, we are more than conquerors through Him who loved us. For I am sure that neither death nor life, nor angels, nor rulers, nor things present, nor things to come, nor powers, nor height, nor depth, nor anything else in all of creation will be able to separate us from the love of God in Christ Jesus." Notice what it says there. In all these things we're conquerors. What things? What shall separate us from the love of God? When you go through distress, when you go through tribulation, let me tell you, cancer can't separate you. Distress can't separate you. Discouragement, depression, divorce, none of these things can separate you from the love of Christ, because the love of God is so powerful. God's heart is so towards us. He has promised that He would never leave us nor forsake us. So even when it seems like we're losing, we still win, because nothing can remove us from the love of God. Nothing you're going through today, nothing you're going to go through tomorrow, not even death can separate you from the one who loves you. See, right now, Mitchell's won. We're gathered in Richland, Michigan in a building worshiping our God, and our faith is, we're still living by faith because it has not yet become sight. But the moment that Mitchell took his last breath, when death thought it had its victory, when his eyes closed here, his eyes opened immediately in heaven, and he saw the Lord that he had served and had faith in this entire journey. His pain was gone. He is whole. He is complete because he chose to leap over the barrier, trusting God with where his feet were going to land. And he landed right in the arms of a loving God whose heart is furious towards us. Furious, passionate, fierce love for us, that nothing can defeat us, nothing can overcome us, nothing can separate us, nothing can steal our hope from us as long as we don't surrender it. Do we grieve? Yes. Are there times where it's hard? Yes. Are there whys? Yes. But our whys never eclipse the who, because we believe that he is good.